Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the database guy. This is going to be a special video today, and I'm doing this because I got a lot of people on YouTube asking me to do it, saying they're looking forward to this. And what we're going to do today is that we're going to set up PHP, MySQL, and the Apache web server on a Windows subsystem for Linux distribution. Now, these commands are exactly the same if you have Ubuntu or any Debian. Well, I shouldn't say that, but most Debian distributions on a VMware or VirtualBox system. And this is really how you want to do it. You don't want to create a server on an actual physical machine and then have that machine die or blow up or hard drive crash or bad SSD. Then you lose everything. The best thing to do is to set it up on a virtual system, and then you can back it up, you can export it. I'm going to even show you how to do that. And you can always recover just from some point in the past. So I've got a Windows 11 here. We're going to set up WSL. There is a video on how to set up WSL from scratch. I already have it installed on this Windows. I'm going to put a link to that video on YouTube in the description of this video. So if you've never set up WSL before on Windows, you can do it. Again, WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. So let's get going. Now we're going to do most of everything here from the Powershell command line, and the reason is that there really isn't a very good GUI. I haven't ever seen a GUI for WSL commands. I'm thinking about doing it myself, actually creating one using Qt. We'll see if I have time to do that. So what I'm going to do is I click Start on here, and I'm going to type PowerShell, and you want to go into Windows PowerShell. Now, I don't actually have any Windows Subsystem for Linux installed on here because I removed them so I could show you how to do it. So I'm going to say WSL-list, and that shows the ones that are currently installed on this WSL2. Now, there's nothing there, so I'm going to say WSL-list-online, and it'll show you the ones that are available that are approved distributions. Now, I actually got Fedora 28 installed, and I had to go through a whole bunch of stuff to get it installed. However, you can't use it as a server. Systemctl command is not available, and I haven't figured out a way to get around that. So we're going to stick with Ubuntu for right now. So we've got a number of different distributions here. This Ubuntu distribution right there, that is the latest distribution. I'm a little bit frustrated that they did it that way. That distribution is the same as this distribution. So it's almost like a link to the latest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say WSL install, and I'm going to say Ubuntu 22.04. And what WSL do is it'll download the necessary files. I think it went really quickly here because I had already at one point had it installed. And then it goes ahead and says, okay, we're going to set up your environment. It's going to ask me for my user ID. It's going to ask me for a password. Just keep the user ID really simple. Just keep the password really simple. And when it gets there, we're going to go ahead and continue. Okay, so it asked me for my username. I'm going to just type Linux user. You're never going to really have to use this. My password is just going to be password. Now it looks like there's nothing typing, but that's a security feature. Okay, so now there you go. You've got it up and running. It's doing a few other things. Now this is a little bit slow because it's on a Windows 11 and VMware guest, but it gets faster. All right, there's the command prompt, and the first thing we're going to do is install MySQL. And the way that you do that is you say sudo apt update, and then you type in your password. And what that does is simply downloading the software libraries, so you have the most recent catalog, and then so when you upgrade the operating system, it's going to know what the current is as to what you currently have. And then I'm going to update it for upgrade. Yes, I want to upgrade it. Let that upgrade continue and finish up. Now what we're going to do is after we install MySQL, we're going to try to log into it from our Windows. The Windows subsystem for Linux is going to be a nice little server environment that's not going to affect our main Windows 11, but we can communicate with it. So you're going to learn a lot in this video. We're going to talk about the IP address. We're going to talk about everything necessary to actually I want to say dial in because I'm from that generation where we had to use phones to dial into the computer. But we're going to dial into that computer and we're going to actually be able to, like it's a remote computer. Okay, once the upgrade is done, you don't have to reboot or anything. I'm going to type if config to see if we have those tools installed, and we don't. So I'm going to say sudo apt install net tools -y. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you the ability to check your IP address, because you're going to need that IP address to dial in remotely. So I'm going to say if config, and this is the IP address right here that you want to write down. In this case, it's 172.18.18.20. Now this is the identification of this operating system to the Internet Protocol IP, so you can actually connect to it remotely. So you're going to want to write that down. Now that could possibly change every time your Windows 11 boots up, or every time you terminate or restart this Windows subsystem for Linux Ubuntu. That may change. So you're going to get used to this ifconfig command. So you definitely want to do that sudo apt install net-tools-y. Now I'm going to put all these commands in the description of this video, so not a big deal. All right, so let's go ahead and install MySQL. I'm going to sudo apt install MySQL client-y, and that's going to install the client portion, which is the portion that allows you to actually type in the command to access the server. Now I'm going to do, and I just press the up key there, and I'm going to type server. Go ahead and let the server install. Now once the server is installed, we have to start the MySQL service, and then we have to go in and configure MySQL. All of this is doable from the command line. It's very, very easy. We're even going to download some example databases like we did in the Java, Python, and C videos that I did on database development. So let's go ahead and let the server finish installing. And then we're going to go ahead and start the service and then actually download some databases and implement them. Okay, so during the installation it said that MySQLD, which is the service, that's running as process ID 9373, which means that I think it's actually running. I could actually check it by sudo systemctl status mysql.service, and it shows that it's running. It shows you some other information about it, so we don't actually have to do it. But if you actually want to start the service, instead of status you would say start. You could also say restart. So like, let's say you made some changes to the MySQL configuration files. This will allow you to restart it after you make those changes. All right, so let's go in and configure MySQL. So I'm going to type sudo MySQL. Here I am in the SQL prompt. Now there's a number of things I have to do. I'm going to drop the root user and notice the semicolon at the end. So I'm going to drop the root user, and then I'm going to add the root user. You have to get this right. And I'm just going to put the word password as the password. Make sure you type that in right. Okay. So it's root in single quotes at single quotes localhost. And I did something wrong there. What did I do? So add. Oh, it's not add user, it's create user. Okay, so now I'm going to create another user. So this user right here, this is the user for when you're on the computer accessing MySQL directly. You're on the local host. This user right here with the %sign, that means that I could log in from any computer I want. So that's the user that allows me to do that. So now we have to grant authorities to those users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say grant all privileges on everything to root at localhost with grant option. Make sure we've got that right. Oh, so I typed something wrong there. So grant all privileges on everything. Oh, forgot the close. And then we're going to do the same thing with the % sign. So now the root user, whether it's logged in locally or logged in remotely, I can do anything I want on the operating system. Okay, so once I'm done with that, I'm going to say flush privileges. And then I'm going to exit. Now, let's go ahead and log in as root and see if we can see anything in the database list. So I'm going to say MySQL-user root-p. The password was password. I'm going to show databases. So MySQL set up. You're all set up. Everything's ready to go. Now, the other thing that I want to do here is I want to, after I install MySQL, I want to get out and I want to tell the firewall to let connections come in through the MySQL port of 3306. So to do that, I'm going to say sudo ufw allow from any to any port 3306 protocol TCP. UFW is the firewall for Ubuntu, and we also want to do it for UDP. So we want to issue those two commands, and now anybody can connect remotely into that server. So I think what we need to do now is let's go ahead and install some sample databases. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say sudo apt install -y zip, and then I'm going to install unzip. Now the reason that we're doing this is that the zip and the unzip programs are what we use to unzip or zip up compressed folders, and we're going to need that when we download those. This is getting in the way there. All right. So now let's download. There's a couple of different example databases I want to download, so I'm just going to copy and paste those instead of typing them in. Let's see if that'll work. There we go. Okay, so it downloaded the first one. I'm going to do an ls. There it is right there. So I'm going to say unzip MySQL sample database.zip. And there's the SQL file. So now I'm going to say MySQL-user root-p-t MySQL sample database.sql. Type in my password. And it should have imported. I would have actually gotten an error if I hadn't. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download one other example database, and this actually comes from MySQL directly. So this is going to be a git clone from GitHub. So I'm going to download that. Now the reason we're doing this is so we can actually have some data in the database to query against. So let that download. That actually downloaded into a Git folder, so I'm going to change directory to test database. And I'm going to do the same command I did, except instead of MySQL sample, I'm going to say employees.sql. And now it's going to import all of that. All right, awesome. Now what we're going to do now, oh, we're going to do so much stuff. So let me see if I actually have this set up where I could just type in MySQL. I certainly do. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I opened up another window, and I'm going to try to connect remotely into this little server that we just set up. And so to do that, I'm going to need the IP address. I didn't write it down, so let's let this finish. We're going to do an ifconfig one more time. Now remember, this is just setting it up. This isn't something that you have to do every single time, but it's just setting up the server. And then after we remotely log in from my terminal, we're going to be able to install Apache, and then install PHP. And this is the order in which you should do things. Install MySQL, then install Apache, which is the web server, and then PHP. All right, great. So let's do an if config. All right, it's one set. Okay. So I'm going to say MySQL-user root-p-h is the host address. Okay. Now I wonder if I did something wrong here. This is something that you could very easily have a problem with. Either the firewall is not set up correctly, or I didn't set up the users correctly. Let me make sure I typed this in correctly. (172.18.18.220). You do not want to use the 127 because that's for local host. Maybe I typed in the password wrong. Okay, so we have another problem here. Let's take a moment. Let's figure this out. Oh, so I was trying all these different things, and I looked at the instructions, and I didn't follow the instructions right. So there's something I forgot to do. What's happened is that MySQL is bound by the local host IP address. So if I say if config, it is only going to allow communications on this IP address, which is localhost. It's not going to allow it via that IP address. So what we have to do is I have to go to, actually I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to say nano etc mysql mysql.conf.d mysqld.cnf, and doesn't look like that's there. I must have typed it in wrong. So etc mysql mysql.conf.d. I put a slash. All right, there it is. So I want to page down to this bind address, and I want to put a hashtag in front of it. And I'm going to exit, save, enter. Oh, permission denied, so I'm going to exit, and I have to say sudo. And go down and find that bind address. And now it's saved it okay. So now I have to restart MySQL. So I'm going to say sudo system. Let's restart them all. We're going to restart the firewall. And then we're going to restart and now we're going to go back to our command line. Now this one has to restart there. It restarted okay. So now I'm going to try to hook up again. And boom, now I'm in. So all because I didn't restart the firewall and because I didn't unbind the 127.0.0.1, I believe, IP address from MySQL. And that's a security thing. They don't want you to be able to log in remotely to a MySQL database server unless the administrator has specifically said, that's what I want. So from here, I'm going to say show databases. And there's our classic models. There's those employees. I'm going to say describe employees. Oh, I have to say use employees. I'm going to say show tables. And you can see the tables in the employee database. I can say use classic models. And then I can say show tables. Kind of the similar thing, but it's just some example data. All right, so great. So now we've got MySQL set up. Let's exit up. Actually, we're still in the command line on my local computer, so I'm going to exit out of MySQL. This is still my Ubuntu right here. You can tell by the user ID that I set up. So now we're going to install Apache. Apache is the web server. And so I'm going to say sudo apt install apache 2-y. Let that go ahead and install. Then we're going to start Apache, the Apache web server. Then we're going to allow communications with it via the firewall. And then I'm going to bring up my browser. In fact, while that's going on, I'm going to bring up my browser right now. So I'm going to say, well, go to 172. What was that IP address again? 172.18.18.20. 220. So 172.18.18.220. And it let me in. So it looks like the firewall is already set up for this. However, it might not be, so let's go through those commands anyway. So Apache is already started, and I can check that by sudo systemctl status Apache 2. It's active. If I need to restart it, I could just say restart. And that's it. Now, if I want to add Apache to the firewall, which is a good idea, I'm really kind of surprised that it let me in. I'm going to type sudo ufw allow in Apache. So anything Apache is going to be allowed through the firewall. Now, there's one other thing that we want to do. If I do an ls var www, you can see that there's an HTML folder. We need to make sure that the current user is the owner of that HTML folder. That's where all of your web pages are going to be located. So what we're going to do is we're going to say sudo change the owner and recurse down through the directory tree Linux user var www HTML. And that's going to allow me to make changes to the web pages as Linux user. Otherwise, I would have to do it as root every time. All right, that's it. Apache is done. You can see that we've got an Apache web page here. Awesome. And this is the browser, not from within Ubuntu. This is the browser from Windows. All right, the last thing we need to do is install PHP. So I'm going to say, and I'm going to copy and paste this because it's not a short installation. So we're going to install all the modules for PHP. Now there's one last thing that we have to do to make sure that we can see error messages very easily on PHP. We're going to have to edit the php.ini file, and we're going to use Nano for that. Actually, we used Nano editor last time. I'm going to use the Vim editor next, and I think Vim was automatically installed, but we'll see in just a moment. And then we're going to write our very first PHP web page. Okay, so let's edit. So I'm going to say vim etc php 8.1 apache 2 php.ini. All right, and now we want to page down and we want to find the display error messages. And I could do a / display errors. There it is right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And it says changing read-only file. Oops, I keep forgetting to put that sudo in front. And actually, I really am forgetting this stuff. It's a Saturday morning. Give me a break. Display error. Woo! All right, there it is. So I'm going to go to the end. Make that on. Write and quit. Now I'm going to restart Apache. And that also restarted the PHP. And now let's go ahead and create our very first PHP web page. So I'm going to use Nano for this. I'm going to say Nano var www HTML, and I'm going to call this test php.php. And I'm going to put in some very simple lines of code in here. This right here says that this is going to be a PHP script. Everything in between this line and this line is a PHP script. It's a lot like JavaScript, the way that that works. And I'm going to put PHP info. PHP info is a function of PHP that will display everything you need in the web browser. So I'm going to press Control X. Yes, I want to save it. Enter. Okay, so now we're going to look for test php.php. So there's my web browser. Test php.php. Enter. Oh, something happened. What happened? Now, the fact that this displayed is because we set that php.ini file thing. So it's very important to turn that on so you can see the errors. So there looks like we've got some kind of a problem on line 3. So let's go ahead and edit that. 1, 2, 3. Let's get rid of that. Oh, I typed it in wrong. Duh. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the indenting or anything like that. I typed in PNP in off. All right, let's try it again. And there you go. So now you got your PHP version information. That's what PHP info does. Now, the fact that we were able to see that error is pretty cool. Let me show you just how bad PHP actually is. I'm going to turn off the display errors, and I'm going to show you what happens. Oh, forgot to. This is the morning. Okay, so let me go ahead and edit that, and I'm gonna turn off these errors again. And let me show you how unforgiving PHP is. And then I'm going to edit that file again. And I'm going to make that same error in off. And let's go ahead and refresh the web page. You don't see anything. Without that errors on, this is what you see. And you have to hope that you can figure it out. So it's so important to turn that on. I'm going to turn that sucker on right now. I just hate having that off. Now, maybe when you're in a production environment or something, I don't know. So let's restart it. So now, with it on, you can actually see the line number where the error was. Oh man, PHP is very unforgiving. And the reason is because it happens on the server, not on your local computer. So let's go ahead and edit that, fix that problem. Refresh it, and there's your PHP info. All right, one last thing I want to do. I want to create a file called test MySQL. Now, if you followed all the steps, this should work out really, really well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy a really nice little program that I just wrote just last night as I was getting ready for this video. And what this program is going to do is it's going to connect to your MySQL server. And it's going to display some employee information. So let's go over this code really quickly. So this is a PHP script. These are variable names. We have the server name, localhost, we have the username root, the password, and we have the database name employees. That's the name of the employees database. And I echo, and so the way the PHP works is that when you echo something, it's like print, it's like cout in C++, it's like print line in other languages. What this does is it actually generates HTML code. So echo actually will generate HTML code to print the string starting the database connection, and you can actually see this BR at the end. That means break. That means go to the next line. Notice the period. The period in between the two strings is concatenation. In Java, C++, Python, you'd use the plus, but in PHP, you use the dot. Then we've got a try-catch block, and what the try-catch block does is it creates a variable called connection. It makes that variable global so everybody can see it. Every function within the script can see connection. And what this does is it makes a new connection to the server, to the MySQL server. And it uses the server name, the username, the password, and the database. And if that connects correctly, then it prints out on the screen, database connection successful. If you type something invalid in there, like let's say you decided to change the root to rot, if you do that, and let me go ahead and save that, Control O. Now if I go to my browser and I type test MySQL, we get an error. It says there's a problem with rot. So that's what this allows me to do. This catch will catch this error, and it'll go into this, and the program will not just die. It just won't give you blank on the screen. it'll actually give you some information. So that's what a try catch does. If you don't do that, it'll be an uncaught exception, and you'll get a very strange error on your web page, and it's not cool. Okay, so let's change that to root, and I'll write that out again. All right, let's look at some more code. So that creates the connection, and this is a lot like Python, Java, and C++. So now we set up our query, and this is our SQL query that's going to just grab the employee number, last name, and first name from the employees table within the employees database, and it's going to order it by last name, and it's going to limit it to 10. Now, if I want to get rid of the order, if I don't want it to automatically be sorted, in this case, let's go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, we can see the result. Then we can say the result is equal to the connection, which was done up here. The connection, execute the query SQL, which is this variable right here. If that fails, then it's going to die, and it's going to print out some information on the screen. But because we have this in a try, before it does that, it's actually going to do the catch. So we really don't need this or die. So it's going to do this catch. It's going to display an error message, and the program's going to, the script is going to end. Then what we've got is that if we got some results back from the query, if we didn't get any results, that's what the exclamation mark there. It's going to display an error message. If we did get results, so if the number of rows is greater than 0, in other words, the query was successful, it was a correct query, but there was no data, that would be equal to 0, then the else is going to happen. But in this case, the if is going to happen, and look at this. This is echoing HTML. So in PHP, you have to know HTML. So what this is going to do is this is going to create a style, a little cascading style inside of the HTML, which means that a table header, a table row, they should have a border of 1 pixel solid black, and that's the end of the style. And then we create a table with the table headers, and then we go through a while loop that fetches one row at a time, creates a table row with the employee number, the last name, and the first name. It ends the table. Now, if the fetch didn't work, then we have this catch right here to make sure that the program just doesn't give you blank. If the number of rows found is equal to 0, it just prints 0 results. So I'm going to press Control-O, and now let's go ahead and refresh our browser, and there's our data. So this is our very first dynamic web page, which PHP has written the HTML for because we programmatically asked it to do it, and now we actually got some real data. And you could actually, we're going to do that in this course. You can actually have them. You type in the information, like I want to find the details for only this one employee. I want to find all employees with the same first name. We're going to go through all that. But this right here is how you write your first PHP program. And the way that we did all this is from a Windows subsystem for Linux operating system. So let's take a look at this from a GUI point of view. I'm going to go ahead and on my Windows, I'm going to search for MySQL, and here's my Workbench right here, so I'm going to click on that. Now this is, again, I have to remember the IP address of my Windows subsystem for Linux. So there's my Workbench. I'm going to click on the plus next to MySQL connections. I'm going to call this WSL Ubuntu 23.2.04. And then I have to put the IP address. Now, I forgot it again, so I'm going to type if config. Up, it's 172.18.18.220. So I'm going to put 172.220. 3306 is fine. We're going to load in as root. I'm going to test the connection. It's going to ask me for my password on my Windows subsystem for Linux. No problem. It found it. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm just going to click on that link. And I'm now connected to the MySQL and my Windows subsystem for Linux. I can click down here on schemas, and you can see our classic models and our employees. I can look at tables. I'm going to click on departments, right click, and I'm going to say select row limit 1000. And there's the data. So I'm actually on Windows communicating with my Windows subsystem for Linux server using this GUI tool. I think that's pretty cool. So the last thing I want to show you here is how to, now that you've got your subsystem for Linux all set up, you might want to back it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export it to a what they call a tar file, and then you can actually import it. You can actually take it to another computer, you can take it to a friend, you can do whatever you want. It's perfectly legal to do that. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to leave my Windows subsystem for Linux, and I still have my PowerShell. I'm going to say WSL -- shutdown. That's going to terminate all Windows subsystem for Linux operating systems. It's going to shut them down. And then what I'm going to say is WSL export. I have to give it now I have to tell them which distribution I want to export. So before I do that, I'm going to say list just to make sure, and it's the Ubuntu 2204. So I'm going to say WSL export Ubuntu 22.04. Whoops. And I'm going to call this Ubuntu 22 MySQL tar. And that's actually going to take the entire little operating system of Ubuntu and it's going to save it as a tar file. Now that you export it, how do you want to import it on another computer? Or maybe you've screwed something up on it, you need to go back to a point in time and you want to import it onto the same computer. Well, as soon as it's done exporting, I'm going to show you how to do that. It's actually pretty simple. So what you have then after the export is done is you'll see your Ubuntu 22 MySQL.tar file. So now how do we import that back in? Now, even though I've already got it on this computer, I can go ahead, I'm going to make a directory on my C drive called WSL Ubuntu MySQL. So that's going to create a directory, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import it. So I'm going to say WSL import, and we want to actually know what do we want to call it. Well, I'm going to call this Bill's MySQL Ubuntu. That's just the name of the distribution you're going to give it. So once you give it a name, and now you specify where it's located. So I'm going to say it's located, now I'm in my current directory, so I'm just going to say the current directory. So it's going to be called Ubuntu 22 MySQL.tar. Before that, where are we going to store it? We're going to store it in C:\/ WSL Ubuntu MySQL. So let's go over this again. We say WSL import into a distribution name Bill's MySQL Ubuntu. Where do I want to store it? I want to store it in that directory I just created, C:\/ WSL Ubuntu MySQL. And where is the file that we want to import? It is the one we just exported. Now, if you put it on a USB thumb drive, let's say you put it on a USB thumb drive, let's say it's your E drive, you might put a drive letter like that. I'm going to press enter, and it's going to go ahead and import that, and it's going to store it in the Ubuntu MySQL subdirectory underneath the WSL directory, which is on the C drive. And then when I list my distributions, I will see that new one. So when the import is successful, let's go ahead and say WSL list, and you'll see the new distribution. So if you want to run that distribution yourself, you would say WSL distribution Bill's MySQL Ubuntu, and it'll load that up, and that is completely different than the Ubuntu 22.04, the default distribution that we originated that export from. So that's how you can do that. You can copy that tar file to a USB thumb drive, hand it to anybody in the universe. It doesn't matter. There's no confidential data. There's nothing copyrighted. So that's pretty cool how you can save your distribution like a snapshot in time, and then you can take it to any computer you want. Now, I'm not even going to show you how to do this on Windows because it's a nightmare. This was not a short video, but you got all of this installed at one time. if you do this on Windows, the native Windows, first of all, you're risking your operating system, I believe. Second of all, it's going to take hours. So doing it on Windows Subsystem for Linux is great. If you want, you could actually access the data from here. You could even create a file, an Eclipse project, and I'm going to show you that in a future video. An Eclipse PHP project with syntax highlighting and all that, and we're going to do that in a future video. So until then, hope to see you.